Angelica sat in her cozy apartment in Javea, with the warm Spanish sun filtering through the window. She was determined to practice her Castilian by watching the TV, despite the English subtitles that always seemed to be available. The room was tastefully decorated with Spanish artwork and pottery, and the faint aroma of citrus filled the air. Outside the window, the sound of cars and motorbikes whizzing by on the street below could be heard. She turned on the television and tuned into a Spanish drama series. The characters spoke quickly and with passion, and Angelica found herself struggling to keep up. She listened intently, trying to repeat the words and phrases as best she could, but soon became frustrated and turned on the English subtitles. As she watched, she couldn't help but notice the melodramatic acting and the over-the-top dialogue. Suddenly, life took a dark turn. A news report appeared on the screen, announcing that a local teacher, Franco, had confessed to killing his brother in a fit of rage. Angelica gasped in shock and disbelief. She had met Franco a few times at her son Tommy's school and had always found him to be friendly and polite. She wondered what could have driven him to commit such a heinous act. Despite her initial frustration with the dialogue, Angelica realized that watching Spanish television was a great way to immerse herself in the language and culture of her new home. She made a mental note to continue practicing her Castilian and to explore more of the vibrant and diverse media available in Spain. But an even bigger mental note told her that she needed to look into the death of Franco's brother. The teacher was a kind and gentle soul who didn't seem to her like he could harm a fly. But here he was on the television in front of her in handcuffs, admitting to the killing of his own brother, no less. Something didn't feel right. Just then, Tommy walked into the room. Angelica knew that this was the time to turn the television off. Tommy would at first be excited to see his teacher on the TV. And then he would be devastated beyond consolation in finding out that the teacher had done something bad. And that he would never teach Tommy again. 10 minutes later, the pair of them were in the kitchen, mulling over their food options. Tommy sat at the kitchen table, swinging his legs back and forth as he pondered his options.
"What do you want for tea tonight, Tommy?"
Angelica asked, leaning against the counter. Tommy thought for a moment before answering.
"Can we have pizza, Mum?"
Angelica sighed. She knew how much Tommy loved pizza, but she was determined to get him to eat something healthy.
"I was thinking maybe we could have some grilled chicken and vegetables tonight. You know, something really nutritious and good for your body."
Tommy scrunched up his face and shook his head.
"I don't like vegetables, Mum. And I don't want chicken either. I want pizza."
Angelica tried a different approach.
"Well, how about we make our own pizza? We can use whole wheat crust and put lots of veggies on it. It'll be just as tasty, but much better for you."
Tommy perked up at this idea.
"Can we put lots of cheese on it too, Mum?"
Angelica chuckled.
"Of course, Tommy. We can put on as much cheese as you like. But we need to make sure we're eating the healthy stuff too."
Tommy nodded, still excited about the prospect of making his own pizza.
"Okay, Mum. Let's do it."
Angelica smiled, happy that she had found a compromise.
"Great, let's get started then."
Angelica was able to compartmentalize everything in her life. What mother couldn't? She could separate the happy times with Tommy from the more serious times. And, as such, she was able to push thoughts of Franco to the back of her mind until Tommy went to bed. But as soon as she had left her son asleep in his room, after a bedtime story, of course, Angelica set off on a mission. Social media was her ally when looking into a crime. And she started with Franco Bordolino, the teacher who had told the police he had killed his own brother. Franco's social media activity wasn't large. He was in his 60s. People of that age tended to be on social media to stay in touch with what their family and friends were doing rather than document every facet of their lives. Angelica preferred it this way. But when she was looking into a crime, less information meant she had to work hard to put the pieces together. After an hour, she had a family tree of sorts. She jotted down their names and connections on a pad that contained details of all the cases she had investigated. Franco Bordolino, his brother Angelico Bordolino, Franco's son James, Angelico's daughter Marta, Angelico's son Peter, another family member, of unknown connection, called Luciana Bordolino, Angelica drew arrows between the people, adding family connection on the arrow, such as cousin, nephew, niece, etc. This allowed her to see the connections between each pair of people at a glance. She felt like she knew the younger ones pretty well. Their social activity was much more frequent. She could see that Marta lived in Portugal, where she was a budding professional footballer. She could see that Luciana lived in Australia. And she could see that both James and Peter lived in Javea. She knew that Franco would be the topic of conversation at the school gates the next day. Angelica was known for her lateness. She didn't get to anywhere or anything on time. But the next day, she steeled her mind that she would be at the school gates with the earliest of the arrivals. She wanted to get all the gossip about Franco Bodolino. Angelica arrived at the school gates, greeted by the familiar buzz of parents gossiping. As she approached, she overheard a few snippets of conversation about Franco Bodolino. One mum, clutching her coffee cup, was saying to another,
"I can't believe it, he seemed like such a nice guy. I've had nothing but good things to say about him."
Another mother chimed in,
"I've never trusted him. There was always something off about him. He was always so cold and distant with the kids."
That didn't fit with Angelica's version of Franco. But she was emotionally aware enough to understand that everyone saw people differently. She decided not to judge but to ask questions and listen to the answers. Angelica joined the conversation, curious to know more about the incident.
Do you know what happened?
She asked. The first mum replied,
Apparently, Franco and his brother had a huge argument and things got out of hand. He ended up confessing to the murder.
Angelica shook her head in disbelief.
That's terrible. I feel so bad for his family.
The second mum nodded in agreement.
It's always the quiet ones you have to watch out for.
As more parents arrived, the conversation shifted to speculation about what might happen to Franco and whether he would be sent to prison. One mother expressed concern for her child, who had been in Franco's class the previous year. Angelica listened to the chatter, trying to make sense of the situation. It was clear that everyone was shocked by the news, but opinions about Franco's character were divided. As the bell rang and the parents dispersed, Angelica couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over her. The thought of a teacher committing such a monstrous crime was difficult to reconcile with the person she had seen regularly at the school gates. Angelica decided that she would throw caution to the wind. She had several hours before Tommy came out of school. She had an idea. It was a long shot. But Angelica loved a long shot. It felt like it was the story of her life. As Angelica drove from Javea to the penitentiary center of Valencia Picassent, she found the journey to be a difficult one. The weather was hot and dry, with little respite from the sun's rays. The roads were winding and narrow, and the traffic was heavy in places, which made it hard to keep a steady pace. Angelica could feel the sweat pooling at the small of her back as she gripped the steering wheel. After over an hour of driving, she finally arrived at the prison. It was a massive, imposing structure with high walls and guard towers looming over the surrounding countryside. Angelica's heart was pounding as she parked her car and made her way inside. She had no idea why she had made the journey. It made sense when she set off. But when she was in the car park, Angelica was riddled with questions. Would he even be there? It was the closest prison to Javea. But that didn't always mean that was the place a murder suspect was taken. Would she be allowed in? Even if she was allowed in, would he even agree to see her? Angelica knew that the only way to get the answers to these questions was to walk up to the prison reception and try. The visit was not an easy one. She had to go through several layers of security, including metal detectors and pat-downs, before being allowed to see Franco. When she finally did, she found him looking gaunt and hollow-eyed. He seemed to have aged years since the last time she had seen him. The conversation was stilted and uncomfortable. Franco was guarded and distant, and Angelica struggled to find the right words to say. Angelica sat across from Franco in the prison's visitation room. She had come seeking answers about the murder of Franco's brother, hoping that he would reveal something that could provide closure. Franco admitted to the crime, but his responses were vague and left Angelica with more questions than answers.
Franco, I need to understand why you did it. What led to the fight with your brother?
Angelica asked, her voice shaking slightly. Franco remained silent for a moment, then spoke in a low voice.
It's complicated, Angelica. I can't really explain it all. It was a moment of rage, and everything just exploded.
Angelica pressed on.
Please, Franco. You owe it to your family to tell the truth. What really happened?
Franco sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair, avoiding her gaze.
You have no idea how much my family owe me. I can't say anything more. You wouldn't understand, Angelica. Just let it go.
But Angelica couldn't let it go. She sensed that there was more to the story, and she was determined to find out what it was. She was resolved to continue to probe deeper, trying to uncover the truth behind the murder of Franco's brother. When it was time to go, she hugged him tightly and promised to come back soon. As she left the prison, she couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness and despair. And then she had the same hot, long journey back home. Angelica was feeling more and more frustrated as she tried to piece together what had happened between Franco and his brother. She needed to talk to someone who might know more. Harvey was the first person that came to mind. She found him sitting alone on a bench in the town square. He looked up and smiled as she approached.
Hey, Angelica. What's up?
I need to talk to you about something. It's about Franco and his brother's murder.
Harvey's expression darkened, but he nodded for her to continue. The case had already been taken away from him. Angelico Bodolino was famous in his own right for being linked to the theatre. The national news had picked up the story and run with it. Figures from on high swooped and took the case to Madrid, the capital city. A team of detectives would deal with it. A solitary local detective was deemed unsuited to solve such a high-profile case. Harvey had explained all of this to Angelica over the phone. She guessed from the noises in the background where he might be. It was Thursday. The market was on in the old town. She followed her hunch and accidentally met up with him.
I just can't shake the feeling that there's more to the story than Franco is telling us. I know you did some digging before the case was whisked away. Do you know anything that might help?
Harvey looked away for a moment before meeting her gaze again.
I can't say anything for certain, but I will say that you should look at the rest of the family.
The rest of the family? What do you mean?
I mean that there are some complicated dynamics between Franco and his family. They've had their fair share of arguments and disagreements over the years. It's possible that something like that could have led to the murder.
Angelica frowned.
What kind of disagreements?
Harvey hesitated for a moment before sighing.
Look, I don't want to gossip or spread rumors. But let's just say that there have been times when Franco's brother wasn't exactly a saint.
Angelica's heart sank.
Are you saying that Franco was justified in killing him?
Harvey held up a hand.
No. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that maybe there's more to the story than just a fit of rage. Maybe Franco felt like he had no other choice.
Angelica nodded slowly, her mind racing.
I see. Thanks for your honesty, Harvey. I appreciate it.
Of course. Just be careful, Angelica. This is a dangerous situation.
With that, Harvey stood up and walked away. Angelica watched him go, feeling even more confused and uncertain than before. But she was determined to get to the bottom of this. She had to know what really happened. And she knew where to go next. Angelica entered the antique shop in Javea Old Town with a sense of awe. She had heard of the shop before but had never actually stepped inside. The small space was packed with antiques and collectibles, each piece seeming to tell its own story. As she wandered through the store, she quickly noticed that it was split into two distinct halves. The first half of the shop was decorated in a classical style, with antique furniture, crystal chandeliers, and ornate silverware. The second half of the shop was quite different, decorated in a more rustic style with vintage signs, old farm equipment, and weathered wooden furniture. Angelica found it fascinating how the handwriting on the price tags differed from one side of the store to the other. The handwriting on the price tags in the first half was neat and precise, whereas the tags in the second half were scrawled and carelessly written. The antiques and collectibles that were on sale in the shop were equally as fascinating. In the classical half of the store, there were beautiful pieces of furniture that had been restored to their former glory. Angelica admired the intricate designs and high-quality artistry. In contrast, the second half of the shop had a more eclectic mix of items, including old tin cans, faded advertisements, and rusty tools. It was almost like walking through a museum of forgotten artifacts. Peter and James Bardolino, the owners of the shop, approached Angelica and welcomed her to their store. They explained that they had both inherited their love for antiques and collectibles from their fathers, who themselves had been avid collectors. Angelica was amazed at the breadth and depth of knowledge they had about the items in the shop. As she continued to explore the store, she couldn't help but notice how the two halves of the shop seemed to be like two different worlds. But the different styles of the two halves of the shop also got Angelica thinking. She remembered the conversations she had had with Harvey about the Bardolino family and the murder. Harvey had hinted that she should look at the rest of the family, and Angelica started to wonder if there was a connection between the family's past and the two halves of the store. Angelica decided that she needed to learn more about the Bardolino family and their history. She knew that it would take some investigating, but she was determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. And the best place to start was by having a conversation with the two cousins.
Angelica looked around some more before approaching the cousins. She wanted to appear as a friendly face. She guessed the family needed to see as many friendly faces as possible at that point in time. The fact that she was hiding her investigative interest behind a facade of friendliness did cause Angelica a great deal of guilt. But she pushed this as far down as possible and put a lid on it. The lid, as far as she was concerned, was that she was helping the family.
How is business?
Angelica asked. This question seemed to cause a rift between the cousins.
I'm off. I have some errands to run. I can't stand here chatting,
Peter stated, leaving the shop without another word, or even waiting for a response. The tension flowed through the air between the cousins. Angelica needed to change tack and ask questions that seemed genuine.
Can you tell me about this antique vase?
Angelica asked James. James seemed uninterested and absent-mindedly responded.
It's from the early 19th century, French, and quite valuable. Now, can you afford it or not? The price is on the tag.
It was clear he meant business, and only business. Trying to make conversation, Angelica asked.
How long has your family owned this shop?
Peter quickly interjected.
Our family has owned this shop for 3 generations, and we take great pride in maintaining its legacy.
Angelica nodded in appreciation and turned to James.
It's such a wonderful family business. What are your plans for the future?
At the mention of the future, James's demeanor changed, and he became visibly upset.
Actually, I'm not sure what the future holds for this shop,
He said, his voice cracking. Angelica could tell something was wrong and asked if everything was okay. James hesitated before finally breaking down in tears.
My father has decided to retire, and I don't know if I can run this store on my own,
He said, struggling to hold back sobs. Feeling sympathetic, Angelica placed a comforting hand on James's shoulder and offered words of encouragement.
Running a family business can be challenging, but it's clear how much this shop means to you. I'm sure you'll find a way to keep it going.
James appreciated her kind words but explained that the shop would be closed for the day. I just can't be here right now, he said, wiping away tears. She looked down at the till point. A plethora of stickers looked back up at her. The one that stood out stated CaixaBank, official payment provider. It stood out with the bright colors and the fact it was the only one in English. Angelica wondered why a Spanish bank would have English-language stickers before James took her attention away from the till. He gently ushered her out, clearly needing some time alone. But where was Peter? Angelica needed to speak to the other cousin. She had a feeling that solving the case would depend on it. Just then she saw Peter fly past in a sports car. She was never any good at determining what make or model a car was. But she was sure this one was expensive at some stage of the past. Presently, it looked like it was great fun but needed some TLC. At the bottom of the hill, the car met with the rest of the traffic on market day and ground to a halt. Angelica saw this as her chance to catch up on foot and see if he stopped nearby. Her luck was in. Peter pulled the car up around 1/4 of a mile away, Angelica still in tow, and Peter got out. He walked into a cafe, ordered a cappuccino and sat at the counter with his back to the cafe. Angelica sat at a table directly behind him, ordered her own coffee, cappuccino also, and did two things, drank and listened. Peter walked into the coffee shop, and the owner greeted him warmly. They knew each other well, having businesses on the same street.
Peter, how's the antique business?
The coffee shop owner asked. Peter let out a frustrated sigh.
To be honest, I can't take it anymore. James and I can't work together any longer.
He said, shaking his head. The coffee shop owner was surprised.
Really? You two have been running the store together for years. What happened?
Peter's face grew red with anger.
James hasn't changed. He's still the same person I grew up with. He's difficult to work with, and I just can't take it anymore.
The coffee shop owner sympathized with Peter.
I'm sorry to hear that. You know, you'll be missed if you leave the antique business.
Peter nodded.
I know, but I can't keep working with him. It's too stressful.
The coffee shop owner leaned in closer.
Peter, I've heard things about James. People say he's an unpleasant man.
Peter's eyes widened.
What do you mean?
The coffee shop owner lowered his voice.
I've heard rumors that he's involved in some shady deals, and he's been seen with some unsavory characters. I'm not sure if it's true, but it's something to keep in mind.
Peter's mind raced with thoughts of what his cousin could be involved in.
I had no idea.
He said, shaking his head in disbelief. The coffee shop owner patted Peter on the back.
Look, I don't want to spread rumors or cause trouble, but you should be careful. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know.
Peter thanked the coffee shop owner and left the shop, feeling uneasy about his future with the antique business. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to James than meets the eye, and he wasn't sure he wanted to be associated with him any longer. Angelica left while Peter was still absorbed by the coffee and the revelations he had just heard. She had some questions to ask. And she knew just where to ask. The only thing she didn't know was whether she would get any answers. Angelica took herself to the Caixa Bank along the street in the old town. Something told her that some of the answers might come by following the money. In her short time investigating crimes, the most common trigger for murder was most definitely money. They talk about crimes of passion, but in Angelica's experience it was pretty much always a crime of cash. Another thing that drew Angelica to the Caixa Bank was her last visit there. One thing that stood out from being at the counter in the past was the fact that the cashier wore the biggest, shiniest badge. A badge so shiny that it reflected what was on the screen back at Angelica. She couldn't get the full screen, but she hoped that she could make out something. Anything that gave her a break in this case. Angelica stood in line at the bank, waiting for a cashier to be free. The queue was long, stretching almost to the entrance, and she felt a sense of impatience as she surveyed the other customers waiting alongside her. The interior of the bank was bright and modern, with white walls, sleek lines, and shiny surfaces reflecting the light from the large windows. The air was cool and conditioned, but Angelica could smell the faint scent of ink and paper as she neared the cashier desk. As she waited, she could hear the sound of rustling papers, the clicking of keyboards, and the soft murmur of conversations between customers and staff. Occasionally, the automated voice system would announce a service or remind customers to take their belongings with them. Angelica felt the sensation of the hard, smooth floor beneath her feet as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. The other people in the queue were a diverse mix of ages and backgrounds. There was an elderly couple discussing their pension plan, a mother with a crying baby in a stroller, and a businessman tapping impatiently on his phone. Angelica observed them with curiosity, wondering what their reasons for being there were and what their lives were like outside of the bank. The atmosphere in the bank was one of order and efficiency, with everyone following the rules and patiently waiting their turn. Angelica couldn't help but feel a sense of relief as she approached the cashier, glad that the wait was almost over.
Hola.
The cashier stated as Angelica got to the front of the queue and approached the counter.
Hola, hablas inglés.
Angelica responded.
Yes, how can I help?
I'm looking for some bank statements for my employer, Bardolino Antigades.
And are you named on the account?
I believe so.
Angelica responded, putting her phone on the counter with the screen on. That gave her the excuse to look closely in the direction of the counter, the cashier, and the badge. Her name was Magdalena. That name made Angelica hungry, as she loved her cake with the same name. But she put that hunger to one side. She needed to focus as much as she could on the reflection in the badge. The cashier clicked away, pressing buttons and sighing.
You don't have access to your employer's account.
Oh, Angelica responded, looking at the sea of red digits from the screen. Red meant negative. Negative money meant problems.
And can you ask your boss to get in touch with us as a matter of urgency? It seems like we have been trying to get in touch with him for quite some time.
Which boss?
James. Peter has been removed from the company account.
I'll ask him when I get back from my lunch break,
Angelica stated, leaving the bank. She now believed that the money trail was the right way to go. As Angelica left the bank, the changing of the guard was happening. Peter made his way back to the antique shop. As soon as he made it onto the threshold, James left. And the swapping of roles didn't stop there. James walked down the street to a coffee shop. Not the same one that Peter frequented, but the one that was a short walk away. Angelica watched the two men go about their separate but connected lives. She pulled out her phone and made a call. James drank his coffee while Angelica sat on the seat outside. She watched. She waited. He drank up. He left. She followed. The trail he made on foot was down the hill away from the old town and towards the port area of Javea. The road the traffic was heading in the same direction. The market was almost over, and people were heading back to their homes, the beach, their lives. He made it most of the way down the hill before turning left into an alleyway. Angelica checked her phone and then followed. As soon as she turned the corner, she realized that she has been spotted further up the hill. James stood face to face with her. He had been watching for her arrival in the alley.
Who are you?
He demanded.
I'm just interested in antiques.
Angelica responded, throwing out all she had by way of reply.
I'm not buying that. Try again.
He answered, stepping towards her.
All right. I am interested in antiques. But that's not what I came to your shop for. I have a few questions.
Let me guess, about my father.
And your uncle. Do you have a few moments?
Not really.
I promise it's worth your while.
The silence filled the alleyway. The cars along the street were still rumbling away from the old town. It would be relatively quiet again until the following Thursday. Angelica took James's silence as a prompt that she should continue. He hadn't told her no, at any rate.
I have a theory about what happened.
Again silence. Again, Angelica took that as permission to continue.
Your business is in a really bad way. Peter has walked away from the business. I know that he isn't named on the company bank account any longer. And he has recently discovered that you're involved in some pretty shady deals. Peter has separated himself from you and your business, a business that is struggling financially. The bank is chasing you. I guess your shady contacts will be chasing you too. That's much more painful than the bank.
How's that?
James asked, moving ever so slowly towards Angelica.
The bank won't break your legs.
True. But what does that have to do with my father? My uncle?
Well, your uncle was a man with money. And I happen to know that people get rich by looking after their cash. Your uncle Angelica was a man of means. That's obvious from the scarce details I can find on his social media profile. My guess is that he loaned you money. You liked that. Family looking after family. And when he wanted it back, you didn't like that one bit. And when he threatened to finish your business, you liked that even less.
So?
James responded. He was in an alleyway with a woman who he could easily overpower. She might have worked him out, but she couldn't stop him.
So? Is that all you can say?
There's no proof.
James countered.
That's where you're wrong. The other thing I know about people with money is that they record everything. There's a detective at his place right now, checking through his documents. I would bet everything I have that there's a record of the money he gave you. And those records will match the records at the bank.
Well, you've given me something to think about. And something to act on.
What might they be?
Angelica inquired.
That I should be more careful who I get money from in the future.
And
That if the detective is at Uncle Angelico's, then he isn't here.
James uttered as he walked towards Angelica, raising his hands towards her neck. Angelica looked behind her. She was too far down the alleyway to escape. The rumble of the traffic wouldn't allow her to attract attention from anyone passing by. She looked forward again and saw James Bardolino within 3 feet of her. Just then, Harvey Jones appeared from the street, rushed towards James Bardolino and brought him to the ground. He had been close enough to hear the conversation. But just to make sure, Angelica had called him. The entire conversation had been recorded for future use. James Bardolino was banged to rights. The father had confessed to protect the son. But justice had been served, thanks to Angelica Boyle.